doing? My name is Chuck Geiling. I'm with JT Sports. Got a couple legends in the industry here, Matty Marshall and Jim Lively. And what we're going to do is we're going to ask a couple questions, guys, just about the history of paintball, what paintball means to you, and then how JT kind of as a leader in the paintball industry and being there from the history standpoint, just some of the old school things from the past and how it's moving forward. So, Jim, you know, why don't you talk about how you got your start in paintball and here you are now, you know, a couple of years later down the road.
1982, I was introduced to the sport under survival games, national survival games. Hayes Knowles, a good friend of mine, a dear neighbor, he got me involved with the sport. That was NSG survival games out of New Hampshire. I was one of the first field operators in the country, and we started writing rules and doing tournaments in 1983. We conducted NSG tournaments up through '89 and started the Masters, which was an industry-known tournament, 15-man in the woods, 12 gram, and we started writing rules, and it eventually turned into the MPPL later on in the history of paintball. Been all over the world, played on all the continents, introduced paintball tournament style to pretty much everywhere in the planet. JT was a very big part of that. Worked with John Gregory, and at the time Marty Tripes was their outside rep, technician, I guess.
We used to ride for him, and then started working for him.
That's right. He and Ross Alexander and we sat down in San Diego in the summer of '87 and dreamed up the Masters program for the industry. It was the first industry event, and John was very instrumental in helping us do that. JT was one of my primary sponsors in those early years.
What are the roots of JT, Jim? I mean, I think we kind of all know the answer to that question, but I think you've got a little something you can speak to.
It all started at motocross. JT racing.
Bob Hurricane Hanna back in the day.
Essential bags. This is what we kept our goggles in back in those days. So this is the origination of JT. It was a motocross outfitting apparel company. And John was considered John Tijuana, and therefore JT.
Yeah. And the first thing he made, I wrote an article about John actually for Faceful and about the history of JT and how the whole company got started. His first product was socks. That was the very first product. Yep, it was socks, and he had these specific socks, and you know they would go ride and stuff, and you know so it was kind of cool. And the first project was socks, and everyone wanted these socks, so that's how JT got started.
Really?
Yeah. Wow. And JT is just TJ backwards. So and I grew up in San Diego, so you know motocross guys, those were some of the guys I grew up with. And I remember when I first got sponsored by JT, and I was still in high school, and my motocross friends were like, "Oh, dude, that's awesome! You know, you got sponsored by JT, and you know, I wear that stuff too." And so that's kind of cool to see it, and it transitioned pretty quickly because John really embraced paintball, you know, and so it really became the paintball brand. You know, like that was like the first paintball brand. So it was kind of cool to see that JT's still here and you know having an awesome showing and still have badass goggles and.
Perfect. Exactly.
How do you guys think, you know, today we've some players from Dynasty, so we've got professional tournament guys here, we've got scenario guys from all across the country who've come to the event, a bunch of first-time players here. You know, how does paintball transcend kind of, you know, just the everyday stuff and bring families together? We've talked about it with some other folks, but from your perspective, guys, how do you see paintball just you know, really building some good unity amongst kids growing up in families?
It's camaraderie and fellowship. That's the bottom line of the whole thing. I've got some of the best friends that I've ever met in my entire life through the sport. I love it. I love it.
And there's an interesting thing that happens when you play paintball with and against each other. It's like a type of bond that's very unique, you know. And I think that is one of the reasons that that we keep coming back to that. You know, it's when you run with somebody, and and you guys have that experience together. It just kind of crosses any sort of boundary. You know, whether the guy's older than you or from a different country. I mean, like you said, you've gone all over the world. I mean, you meet these paintball players from all over the world, and they really are just like us.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what's fascinating to me about the camaraderie of the sport.
Yeah.
I think too the adrenaline rush would be. I mean, because essentially you're going into battle with these guys.
Yeah.
And, you know,
it's a band of brothers.
You know, well, you're growing up and you want to play Cowboys and Indians or war in your backyard.
Yeah.
You're running around, and now you're doing it on this whole new level. And yeah, band of brothers. Next thing you know, you walk out of a big game like this, and you're pretty pumped up. And I think that's what paintball brings to
Well,
to
that's the cool thing about this is that this stuff and this type of paintball, you know, is that like, you know, I grew up in a canyon, you know, and I always spent all my wrist rocket wars, all that sort of stuff, and this is like that on like times 100, you know, because there's so many people out here. I mean, there was what, 600 people out here or something like that. You get to play paintball with 600 people, like that's, you know, that's stuff that you dream of when you're a kid, and now you can actually do that. So that's one of the coolest things. That's why I love these events.
Yeah.
Love coming to them.
Great. Great. Well, guys, thank you very much. Jim, appreciate your time.
For sure.
Matty,
Thank you so
all
much.
that story.
Take care, guys.